Joe Baran, he's the principal and managing member for Bertison-George. He has over 24 years of experience in many aspects of the energy industry. These efforts include the development of financial and operational assessments of investment opportunities, valuations, market forecasts, risk management strategies for several commodities, strategic purchasing strategies, and process redesign. Joe started Bertison-George after working for a regional mining and geological firm for 4 years. They perform, okay, I'm going to skip that. Previously, he worked at PPG Industries and was responsible for the development of energy and precious metals purchasing and risk management strategies for approximately 50 facilities across North America. Prior to PPG, he worked in the utilities, construction, and consulting firms in the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. Recent presentations and publications include the Oilfield Technology. We have the presenter at national conferences such as the Shale Play Development. He's done the EMLF Winter Workshop and also some presentations in Las Vegas. So Joe has provided expert witness testimony on several Federal Energy Regulatory Commission rate cases and has been retained as an expert witness in several cases in the Marcellus-Utica region. He has an MBA in international business from the University of Pittsburgh and a BS in accounting from the Pennsylvania State University. So if you could please join me in welcoming Joe.
Thank you. Thank you. I think this is really unique because the first presentation created something was based on a very tangible concept.
How you doing, buddy?
It's you can feel, you can touch, you can see a plant. What I'm going to be talking about is very conceptual. So kind of stick with me.
I misplaced my glass.
I have struggled with it.
You'll probably go through a lot of glasses today.
Through some of these issues. But it's a topic that is going to be on the forefront of a lot of project development, whether it's from a federal, state, or local issue. So as you heard, my name is Joe Baran. I'm principal at Bertison-George. We're an energy and economic development consulting firm. We've had a unique perspective on environmental justice, being that we have a location in Pittsburgh and we also have a location in Brooklyn, New York. We have been implementing environmental justice concepts in our economic development reports from the beginning, so we thought it was important to paint up the picture of not just what a project can do to help an area grow economically, but also what the meaning would be for government and residents would be as well as going forward. There we go. So, which one am I on? Yeah, so I gave a presentation on the FERC has recently come out with some policy adjustments and wanted public comments on those. Those were due on the 25th. But some of the biggest things that they've introduced involved environmental justice. So, and it also included more cooperation and working with landowners and service providers in developing their process. So you think, oh, maybe this is just a FERC issue. In 2024, things will change and it'll go away. It's not going to be the case because if you look at the little map, you can see there's a number of states that have implemented environmental justice policies across the state. And if they aren't across the state, there's other ones that aren't on here that would have environmental policies across the board. They would have it. I'm getting an echo. Up here. You're all right? All right. Okay. So you can see where this is going to be an issue that's going to be important, regardless of you're dealing with a local or a federal or a state organizations. For example, if you look at Colorado in 2021, they enacted House Bill 1266, which creates an environmental justice task force in the Department of Public Health for recommendations on how to address environmental justice inequities. So there's many states that have multiple policies that will come into play. So just getting into the FERC process, in the past you would basically look at a project, you have the project benefits, and what does the project need? And it's a step process that you go forward and say, okay, what's the impact on the existing customers? Clear that hurdle and go up that step. And then what's the existing pipelines, which is a subtle change they've included in their policy qualifications. So it's kind of a step process. And then once you go up the ladder, then your project is approved and you go forward. What they're proposing is more of what are the net benefits? And it's not necessarily a step process. It is, everything has to be weighted against each other, which seems simple, but this is where you come into the environmental justice perspective on this. So everything for a project evaluation has to be reviewed with an environmental justice lens. So in other words, the net benefits, or the gross benefits, have to be looked at as, well, how will this affect, or how does it impact environmental justice? And then it's all encompassing on project development. So this is how FERC is looking at it, and I would propose that a lot of the state agencies will look at it in this lens as well. So it kind of puts everything on its head. So in my background, I have 8 years of regulatory background. So cost allocation redesign is pretty simple. You run in the numbers, and then you figure out if a project's worth it or not. And then you look at the environmental aspect of it. This just has a whole different dynamic to how you would evaluate a project. And if anybody has any questions, I'm going through this, please raise your hand. So the other thing that FERC is looking at is from a greenhouse gas assessment perspective. In the past, you look at a pipeline, just for an example, what's the greenhouse gas effect from its construction to its operation, and you figure out and you evaluate the project from there. What FERC is proposing is that a project, say a pipeline, will need to look at its upstream suppliers and their effect on greenhouse gases, and also work with their downstream customers and evaluate their impact from a greenhouse gas perspective. So everything in the circle will be evaluated for a project to go forward, as opposed to in the past, you would just look at the pipeline in the middle. So they're looking for comments on, how is a customer, what's their utilization rate? What has your supplier, what has the producer done to eliminate or reduce greenhouse gases? All of those things will go into a FERC decision to get a project approved. So looking at this from a kind of a 365 and degree review, and then with everything else, how FERC is proposing everything. So again, like we had in the previous slide, you have the pipeline, you have the suppliers, you have the end users, you have landowners that you need to be more proactive in getting their approval and working through that process. And that's a concept that in environmental justice that we're going to cover later, of kind of what that means. But so all those people get included, and also a unique approach is that an existing customer will need to be reviewed as well. So if you have pipe-on-pipe competition, you have to prove that your pipe is more not just financially beneficial, but it helps reduce greenhouse gases rather than your competition. So that kind of gets into the equation and how the previous pipeline has treated landowners and how that will impact their situation. And then the environmental justice perspective comes into play on how all of this comes together, which is also going to include, which I think this is an opportunity for the industry, to evaluate other energy sources. So from renewables, how I think it opens the door to evaluate the full greenhouse gas perspective from renewables. So all of the mining that's going to be needed for their product, how you get that to market. It's not. I think a lot of environmentalists feel like it's just a gas versus renewable argument, and that's not the case. Not how FERC has opened it up. So I think that has an opportunity for the industry to really bring that argument to bear and to get a full picture. If that's what they want, then that's what we should really bring forward. So what is environmental justice? There's a lot of definitions out there. The EPA has it as the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of race, color, national origin, income, and respect to the development, implementation, and enforcement of environmental laws, regulation, and policies. So it's kind of a good, feel-good comment, feel-good kind of definition that they've been utilizing, and I think is probably most relevant for what we're going to address. Another way of putting it is that environmental justice is a consumer's bill of rights. So they have the right to sustainable energy production and right for best available energy infrastructure. Some of these comments, if you look at it and it's like, well, what can that be? Getting back to the previous presentation of, renewables aren't always available. So what really can be, sustainable energy and what is available and what is the infrastructure that needs to bring this to bear. So I think that's, if you really get into this is not a, environmental justice really isn't a argument against fossil fuels to renewable energy, even though those who support renewable energy utilize environmental justice as a tool to support what they're doing. But if you look at the pure definitions from an environmental justice perspective, it's not. So it's kind of interesting from the the little circle for energy identity. And this is where, from our perspective, it's really interesting because if you take a look at the circle, and it's like you compare inner city people versus rural, and you have, do you own a car? A lot of people in New York City don't own cars, and you walk to the grocery store and you walk to wherever, as opposed to, when I was living in Monroeville, we'd have, get in the car to go to Giant Eagle and get in the car to go to see a movie. So it's a different perspective that it's not necessarily a renewable versus fossil fuel argument. The other thing that kind of is unique for our perspective is if you look at the people that have the loudest voices and arguing against fossil fuels, a lot of those are in New York City. And if you look at where a lot of those people live, if you walk from Grand Central up Lexington or Park, and you go and where many affluent people live, if you look at their buildings in New York City are rated for energy, And if you go up and down those 2 blocks, there are a lot of buildings that get D rating. So you have people who are anti-fossil fuels living in very poorly efficient buildings. It's kind of like the Al Gore effect of, you need to do this, but, I'm going to fly my private jet. So when you're looking at these issues, and you have to look at, from an environmental justice perspective, the individual, and how is the individual impacted, and which, again, going back to my background of rates and regulations, that's not really a part of it. You run the numbers and you go from there. So these things are all kind of, they've been a natural progression for the firm, but it's, for me, it's tough sometimes to get my head around things. So further, definitions, and if you haven't guessed, environmental justice is an evolving topic. It's an evolving definition. And a lot of academia that has worked on this are more in the Northeast than anywhere else, even out West. So, it is, looked at as associated with all forms of energy. Like I said, environmental justice is not an anti-fossil fuel argument. It's an evaluation of all options that are on the table. And it shows up in all forms of energy. So this is not a mantra for renewables to go forward with. So this is the most widely accepted definition of environmental justice. So it has energy is fundamental. It's underscores the disproportionate distribution of energy. So, oftentimes, certain communities are carrying the burden of energy, whereas, if you look at an example of this is, areas that can get renewable credits, for example. You can get the renewable credits so you can have your own generation, but yet if you're looking at the projects, they're not going to get those kind of breaks. And so that's something that that certain areas are have burdens that they're struggling with. So striving for equity over equality. This gets to FERC's comments about having more interaction with landowners and people that are involved in the process. One of the big things I have an issue with the FERC process that they're proposing is that they don't define who can intervene. So historically, you had to have standing, and you had to prove that you had standing. So you had skin in the game. You were either going to be impacted from where the pipe was going, or you're going to get new supply. Now, FERC really opens up the door as to any group can intervene on a pipeline matter or anything that they're considering. So, I understand the need for more interaction, but I think that's an issue that FERC is kind of introducing on themselves. So you can see the rest, and again, urges democratic decision making. They really want not just interaction, but they want to have organizations and people to have an input into what a project is being proposed for. So it's not just, hey, we've met with so-and-so community and we've met with that council or that council. They want actual organizations to be formed to help drive projects to go forward. So these are the pillars of environmental justice. And we can go through those, you can read them on their own. But All of these are bent towards making sure that this is a socially accepted, and it's been introduced through a social process in order to move things forward, as opposed to in the past where you just put your pipeline project forward and everyone who has standing can intervene. So, you know, these are concepts that when you read them, you can understand kind of where they're headed with this. But these are the subjects that project developers are really going to have to face with and implement into their processes of getting their projects approved. So why is this important for the oil and gas industry? You know, I've talked about state policies and put the map up here again with all the states that have implemented policies. You know, FERC talked about that. Interesting perspective is that there are a lot of financial policies, and there are two aspects of this. One, you have investors who are looking for you know, projects to be socially responsible, and they're going to mandate and are currently mandating that there are environmental justice policies for things that they're going to fund. So project developers are at risk for not getting funding, whether it's renewables or if it's fossil fuels. And the other is ratings. So in Utah, there's been an issue that the system that has financial analysis for the state's environmental track record, they're getting dinged because they don't have a good track record of environmental justice. So you're having then, that causes downward pressure on project developers. They're going to have to include this in order for the states to have a better rating. And so that's a you know, that's kind of a two-pronged issue that we're facing. And global corporate policies, you know, especially in Europe, this is becoming an even bigger issue, a lot faster, and a lot of things have already been in place. So as there is investment, you know, across continents, this is going to be an issue that comes down the pike as you know, people get more integrated with different countries. So, you know, kind of how to prepare. You know, opposition. This is environmental justice is being used as a tool against oil and gas development. And you can see that in the FERC's policies and how they've changed and what they're proposing. The other way of looking at it is, you know, you can get the project approved and you can, you know, implement things for a specific project, or you can integrate environmental justice in your corporate structure. If you look at a lot of the larger companies, that they are doing that because they're seeing the pressure from the financial community and from regional and global leaders. And then, you know, expand the process beyond the current procedure. So it's whatever you used in the past on reaching out is not going to be good enough. You need to know how to, you know, develop these groups and get support for your project. So, and I think, you know, FERC has opened the door for not just if you're looking for a project, you know, gas on gas competition, but for gas versus other. So I think you have those tools that are available. You just have to learn how to use them to fight for your project. So that's it. Thank you. Yep. Yeah, I mean, they're pretty high level at this point. I think, I forget what Pennsylvania's were, but it's, I think, 2021. They're from the
This is break time now,
It's the
so.
DOE or I forget what
So
agency
I
it
don't-
was, but
I don't really have
this
any
is
other
all
announcements right now.
pretty new. So I think everyone's looking at FERC and that group of what's going to come out and how to change and evolve this. So. Good. Yep.
So where I'm from, we have a pipeline that comes through Illinois, Spire, and it was operational safety for 2 years, and then it was challenged with FERC that the permit was no good. And so I'm just curious, and maybe you stated it, is there like a statute of limitations, like where people can come back on these pipelines and possibly shut them down? You know, they're in need.
Well, that's the interesting aspect of what FERC was proposing, because FERC wasn't grandfathering any projects in. If you didn't have a final order on your project, you were going to be subject to these changes. And so there's nothing, to me, they're kind of putting a square peg into a round hole. You're making a long-term financial decision on a project that is going to evolve over time for technology where there's competition, but yet you're making that decision based on static data of today. So it's to me, I don't know how you bridge that gap, but you have to somehow, and I think the way FERC is going about it is misguided. But yeah, as far as kind of a look back, I don't think there is. But if you don't have a project that has final approval, you're going to be subject to this. And that's one of the arguments a lot of people were making, that wasn't fair. You can be not, you're right on the doorstep, and then you're back in line. So. Yep.
Just a comment, after 6 years of serving on the Pennsylvania DEP Citizens Advisory Council and the Environmental Quality Board for almost 3 years, I was rudely kicked off this past fall for my hatred of RGGI and anti-terrorists. In Pennsylvania, just last year, the Environmental Justice Committee was made a full committee member. Now we got to remember, as pro-fossil fuel people, that we're dealing with a bunch of Philadelphia lawyers that have nothing to do with the Marcellus Shale. It doesn't affect them all, with the exception of Marcus Hook. And everything on the environmental, everything that was ever put in front of environmental justice and the DEP was knocked down immediately. So they're not our friends. This whole ESG, we're all trying to do better, lowering our methanes and trying to do the right thing. But it doesn't matter. We have to realize that these are funded by these huge environmental terrorist organizations, is what I call them. And it's very hard. And a good example of that would be Marcus Hook. One time Marcus Hook employed over 10,000 people.
Yeah.
And there was fires and other thing. We've done a good job in turning Marcus Hook into a natural gas processing with our own Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Ohio natural gas.
Yep.
But they are fighting us on anything we want to do. On any trying to export facilities, what's happening in Russia right now, shipping facilities, and it's an uphill battle. They are not our friends.
Yeah, and that was my comment about having standing, because now just anybody can intervene on projects, and that to me is dangerous. And if you like your example of being kicked off, the fundamental theory is that you have all parties represented in these in environmental justice groups and to support a project, because you want a 365-degree review of these projects. And so you want everyone to have buy-in that you're going to get the best technology to deliver the most robust energy for an end user. And the issue with that is your example, is how are those made up? And so, when you have a project being approved, that's why it's critical to make sure that the groups that are included, and it's not going to just be one for like the entire, you're going to have to go county by county, and making sure that everybody is plugged in and making sure that you have a fair representation. So when you go to FERC, whoever, you can say, you know, these are the people, and you have a robust look and feel to who's been involved in this process. So.
You can't make everybody happy all the time. You can't make everybody involved. The house is not going to be gridlock. Sometimes you just have to do what's right for the greater good.
Yeah, and that is an issue, and you know, that's the trick of what's going to for project development, and I think that is frankly part of the mindset behind some of these proposals, and you know, how can it be, you know, deep sixed right off the bat, because you're never going to have you know, 100% consensus around on the board. Theoretically, you know, from a FERC perspective, they're looking at it as if it's improving what you've done in the past, and you can show that you've tried to appease as many people as you possibly can, that's supposed to be the lever. You know, that's where you're supposed to be. If you have a result that you can just, you know, irritate one group 100%, you know, that's your process is supposed to overshadow the result. So if you have somebody that's just not going to budge, you go to FERC and say, well, we've worked with these groups, and this is our process, everybody's been included, and so we are working with you, FERC. This is, you know, we've done what you've said, and we have an issue, and here's why, and the net effect is X, and we just have to go that route. That is supposed to be the process. That's supposed to be what you need to do, and FERC is supposed to be appeased by that. So, anyway, yeah.
Seems to me, from what I read, not necessarily experience because I'm not in the development area, but it seems to me FERC doesn't want to budge.
Right, and you can go back to what's the makeup of FERC, and how that has changed in the last couple of years.
Yeah, and then the other thing was you had several definitions up there.
Yep.
They were interesting for me to read. Which one is the definition FERC uses?
FERC is using the EPA.
The EPA.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of intergovernmental review, both federally and from a state perspective. They all just go around and evaluate what each other does and tries to, you know, either emulate or improve, you know, what others have done. That's been a big growth area for, you know, that's the process that they followed. So, and EPA's was one of the first ones out of the chute with that. And if you go to their website, it is pretty interesting and fascinating what they've put together. And they have some data and information to try to help walk through the process. But that is helpful from a federal perspective. Whenever you're talking about a specific project, you really need to get a whole lot more granular in the data and the information. All good? Thank you. Wow. Thank you very much.